Welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to resilience, organizational change management, leadership, risk, anything that can help you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. Today, we're going to talk about a couple of those things that I just mentioned: resilient organizations, change management, and my favorite, leadership. And I'd like to welcome to the show today an author, podcaster, leadership development expert, social scientist, organizational development expert, and the Chief Executive Learning Innovation Officer at Point North Group. I got that Celio right, correct? I got it right?
Yes, you did.
Great. Dr. Robin Yap. Dr. Yap, welcome to the show.
Hello. How are you doing, Alex?
Great. It's early in the day, but
Yes, it is.
I'm glad to have you here so we can start talking. I know we had this planned for a little while now, so it's great to finally get you here.
Happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. And I mentioned you're a podcaster. Want to give a shout out to your podcast name?
Sure. They can go to Yap with Dr. Yap in any of the streaming services they use.
There we go. I know Dr. Yap has interviewed me once, so that's why I wanted to give his show a shout out as well. So thank you very much for that. That was a great experience. So let's start on our first topic, resilient organizations. Let's make it simple. First of all, what is resilience to you?
Resilience actually comes in two forms, right? One is resilient as individuals, and resilience also for organizations. As an individual, it'll be fairly straightforward. It's the ability to actually adapt, an ability to sustain yourself in times of very difficult situations and very difficult environments. And how are you able to uh, course correct, navigate, and be able to, in your own perception and expression of what success looks like to you? Now, if that aligns to an organization's resilience, that organization is then able to also adapt in times of change and turbulent times. Their ability to recover and even grow and be able to then have that sustainability in place. So, for any types of changes, whether that's internal or external to that organization, they're able to navigate that and be able to then be much more successful, hopefully, and become good organizations for the environment that they're at.
Well, how do you recognize a good resilient organization? Because there are many organizations that say, yeah, we're resilient. But if I walked into one, you can tell. It's like, no, I don't think you are. So how do you really identify an organization that is resilient or is on a resilient path?
Right. Well, there are a couple of ways, right? So there are key indicators that you are able to identify when you're looking at what resilient organizations look like. So anywhere from, are they able to actually develop learning? Organizations are very much a good key indicators for resilient organizations. And the reason is that the ability to learn from their mistakes, from their successes, and be able to then identify which one is which and what to modify, what to then pursue and continue, is one big indicator. The other thing is the idea of understanding what um, evidence-based practices are around them in their own industry, in the uh, similar types of organizations that they're at. Ultimately, it would be great if there's less competition and more cooperation. And it would be great if organizations actually integrate and and collaborate in their pursuit to be better organizations for people that they serve. And in so doing, that would be based on what kind of evidence practice that they're actually incorporating into their day to day. And that could be anywhere from, textbooks, and it could be anywhere from learning, it could be anywhere from whatever medium that they're able to get content that then assists them in saying, well, this is not just coming from my brain, but also I've tapped into this network of experts that are respected in the industry, and be able to then say, okay, well, X number of people are saying these things, and some of them nuggets I can leverage for my learning organization, and let's do a bit of a test on it and be able to then hopefully, get a better reflection on what they wanted to do the first time around. The other thing is this idea of distributed leadership, and interestingly enough, we see a lot of top-down, kind of very structural pyramid style organizations. But ultimately, if we incorporate the idea that every employee is actually a leader, and they own up to that actual leadership skill or capability, then they are owners of the organizations, right? And it's very difficult, especially when very large organizations try to implement these things. But my organization has actually, we've been able to help very big companies in, globally, to be able to then um, try to not just see distributed leadership is a whole discussion in itself, and we can talk about that at leadership. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's this idea that um, it's not about the power or the control, but it's about the ownership of the activity that they are doing at work. So that's a great indicator. Not a lot of organizations we see that happening. There's a lot of fear around that.
Mhm.
And of course, there's also measurements that are in place. But measurements always matter, but it's not the only thing that's there. So we need to incorporate this whole idea of humans are humans and very complex, but measuring humans should never make them just resources, but actually recognize that they are people. And there's a lot of complexity around that, which we can talk about. So those are kind of the indicators that we would be looking at when it comes to trying to understand, what these organizations are.
I'm going to skip the leadership questions because we're going to talk about that
Yeah,
later on, all on its own. So
I
uh,
jumped here.
we'll revisit some stuff there. You did mention one of the things that caught my attention here, evidence-based,
Yes,
and a lot of organizations. Well, there's two ways of looking at evidence-based. You started to touch on one, and then the other is just matching to standards and guidelines. But
yes.
and then saying, yes, I have a plan for this, or yes, we do that, and it becomes a tick box exercise. So how do you distinguish between the two, where one says, yeah, we have all this, but then the evidence and what you see and experience does not say, align with that tick box?
Right. So you cannot put just any type of model, for example, into an organization. So that never always happens. That never happens. So what I would suggest is that yes, there will be regulatory, for example, is very important, and you do have to do tick box any of the mandatory things. But ultimately, that's just one piece to a larger evidence-based practice. So you need the skill set first to be able to discern which one is which that would fit the environment that you're at, and then be able to also understand, yes, we follow this particular set of required things that we need to do. Um, so OSHA, for example, has very specific guidelines on safety. And so, yeah, you follow that. We are building AI guidelines, for example, and certain countries in the planet have already had that in place, and you check those off. But the way they were actually built, and I've been part of building these very large competency models and all of these things, the standards, they are built with enough leeway for organizations to actually not adjust, but to ensure that they apply to their environment. And you need a leader to be able to understand that, to not just say, okay, well, I have 20 documents that identify this, and I have 40 people that I've hired specifically to do these things. But that's just one piece.
Mhm.
So identify what are the other organizations similar to what we're doing that they have published and actually been able to be successful about, and then incorporate that into what you are doing. So I think it's a two-prong kind of an approach for leaders when it comes to evidence-based practice. Yeah, they need the actual models that are in place, yes. Um, Interestingly enough, organizations that we help, for example, we end up building the models for them as well, which would look at what's going on in the industry, in the organizations that they are, communities that are part of, and then incorporate also what the successes are from other organizations that have played in the same environment. So, kind of have to do those things and then find your differentiator at that point so that then you differentiate yourself from these other organizations. That makes
Uh,
sense?
And I guess you bring in the people element there too, right?
Constantly, yes.
'Cause
And
otherwise,
that
it still could be perceived as a tick box exercise, but it's not if you're focusing on people.
Right. And so it again, it's two-pronged, right? There will be tick boxes specifically for performance.
Mhm.
Then because you do have results that you have to fill in, there are some KPIs you have to deal with, all of those things. But ultimately, to get the most out of engaged employees, it's not just a tick box.
Right.
Because ultimately they would know that they are part of an organization. They do know they have results that they have to produce. But for them to be motivated enough to actually do that is when a smart leader would actually, and very empathetic one, and would be able to differentiate between here's a list of things for you to do, or you are a human and let's have that connection and let's then together work to get you to finish whatever it is that we've identified for your result that you need to build. And I'm there to support you along the way. And it can't just be a lip service, it has to be an actual authentic leader that you need to genuinely be able to understand what those means. And that's a bit of a challenge, right? It's the whole idea of, yeah, but I tell the world that I'm a humans first organization or people centered organization, but then it's very performative rather than actually um, doing the nitty gritty of day to day being a actual human leader. So that makes sense.
It's like leaders that see we keep jumping into the leadership side of things here.
Oh,
The leaders that say they have an open door policy, and I've mentioned this on the show before, but yet you jump through so many hoops to talk to them, they really don't have an open door policy. It's like you said, lip service. That's all it is. So if I walked into an organization and I found that, you know what, this is not a resilient organization, what are, or they're not displaying what I would expect to see, what kind of things could a new leader or an organization and its leadership team start doing differently to put an organization on the path of resilience?
right. So there are a couple of ways. So there's leaders who need to understand to share what is the why to their organization is very important. So you need a leader to be very transparent. And transparency is not just, I'll tell you everything what's going on in the world, but the reality of that is transparent is that I'm providing you what the reasons are for why we're doing what we're doing. And people don't resist the change. What they resist would be the fear of being changed, right? So we all know that we go through change, but the challenge sometimes is if it is imposed upon us without an understanding of why it's being imposed upon us, then it becomes a bit of a challenge. And that now becomes a key action that the leader coming into an organization need to recognize. So you need that environment of availability of information because they would always, it's interesting because I was a leader at one point, a very large organization, and you would be very transparent and you would tell them, talk to me for whatever question that you may have. Interestingly enough, they always talk about what's really affecting their own world, right? It's not like I want to know all the salaries in all of my, peers or whatever. That's just one piece. And really, at the end of the day, what does that gain them other than, yeah, you're the same salary as your peer, right? So it's much bigger than that. Transparency is much bigger than just the financial. It's more of what are our values? Are we living our values? And are we actually going day to day to align to those values? And I will tell you when we're not. I will tell you when we're on track. And therefore, at the end of the day, it's all about communication. Am I able to then communicate authentically what is going on in my organization so that my employees, are able to understand where we're at? Because together, ultimately, we're the ones moving this cog into the larger thing that's going on, right? So, I think that's kind of what one piece that's very important for new leaders coming in. The other piece is this understanding that individuals we adapt in various ways. Well, we call it adaption curves. And it curves because not everybody adapts at the same pace, at the same time, and at the same level of understanding. So therefore, you need a leader to be able to actually navigate that, understand that people have different expressions in how they will actually be following or changing or whatever. And so, as a leader, you need to adjust your approach for those individuals or those departments, if you happen to be, the executive, and be able to then understand that there has to be space for individuals to be able to then kind of curve through that
Mhm.
change. The last part that I was thinking of when it comes to leaders coming in is this idea of, again, me being in the learning world is to create learning loops. Is this idea that we don't have to keep saying, oh, we have a learning organization. We just have to implement the fact that each of the groups that they're part of actually have an opportunity to learn. So we will have, if you look at it from the top, there will be regular communication, but then within the departments themselves or within the smaller groups, they do have much more frequent communication. And in those frequent communication, you need to then identify an opportunity for learning. And if you have that in place for all of those departments, then one, you'll be a learning organization, but then two, you're able to navigate and modify and course correct very quickly because all of the information that they're getting from the various groups got filled up to the one leader or a
Mhm.
group of leaders that have just come in and joined the organization. That makes sense?
Yep.
Good.
On that note, we've come to the end of our first segment. Great chat there, Dr. Yap. I really appreciated that. But we're going to touch base on something you started to mention about understanding the why. And I want to ask you that question in our next segment about organizational change management. We'll be right
Sounds good.
back.